start? Joel? Okay, May 2nd, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. We have some agenda items, but we can go a little out of order with public comment. If there's somebody that wants to start with that, that's fine. There's one posted out front, I believe, and they're
There's one outside, I don't know.
online.
Do they normally have them here?
Yeah, sometimes they're there. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. Morning. Yeah, so first is discuss commercial retail ordinance with focus on delivery services and existing retail outlets. This is just sort of a continuation of a discussion from our last meeting and meetings before. So we could just start with that. You want me to list the agenda items for you, Linda, before we start? We got a couple others. The second one is discuss commercial manufacturing. And third, discussion of process for communicating and consulting with Native tribes regarding land use decisions in areas of traditional tribal cultural affiliation. And that's it. Okay, so we were talking about delivery services. You weren't here. And something we definitely need to talk about more. Some of us want to see them, some of us don't. And so we should explore like the issues and the reasons and try to come up with a direction.
I don't know if Blake's aware, like I was not aware of the delivery service, and it's actually a delivery service to your house or to your place. I thought it was a delivery service from the grower to the store type of a deal when I first started. Last week you guys kind of enlightened me, so you might enlighten Blake. But I don't know, do you know about delivery services?
So yeah, it's just another component of a retail outlet. It's not a separate license category. It'd be something that a licensed retailer would be allowed to do if allowed by the county ordinance, and that would be making retail deliveries to individuals, and they can be made to any physical address that's like private property, so a home. And then we looked at it looked like a hotel, a restaurant, something like that would also fit into the state rules. Doesn't mean that the county can't have different rules.
And is it currently allowed in Illinois or state?
Yeah, it's allowed in the state under a retail license. So since we don't have, we don't have that right now, it wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, we kind of came to the conclusion in our cumulative discussion that there's no way for the county to prevent that from happening. For example, a Humboldt County business could deliver to Delnart County. You can't prevent access to the people's houses and the roads. All you could do as a county would be to say to the businesses here that you just couldn't do it, but that wouldn't prevent it from actually still happening.
So
I would just say that if that was your conclusion, then you're wrong. The county can have an ordinance against delivering or peddling anything we want. For instance, my example would be Humboldt County's ordinance against raw milk sales and delivery and transportation. So
that's a good point that we should definitely get into, because we were speaking on the pretext that Joel had suggested that under state law, there's certain things like the state regime, the way it's set out, spells out what the counties can and can't do. And it looked like, well, it's pretty clear that counties and cities can't stop use of the roadway. So like if I was gonna pass through Delnart County, say, and go, which would be difficult because there's no way to pass through, but you can't stop that. And so by extension, I think the idea was that you can't really legally prevent delivery service use of roads, but that isn't really fully settled, and the Bureau is gonna come out with some more clarifications with their rules, because that I think is in dispute, and Joel could maybe weigh in on it a little bit, whether or not a municipality can block delivery services from another locality, and it's still being debated. It's being debated now.
Sure.
In other localities.
So again, my point, and I think we've come to this crossroads multiple times during our committee meetings here, is that My basic understanding is that counties can do whatever you want over and above anybody else's regulations, generally, all right? And y'all keep pushing back to that, well, it's allowed there, so we can't stop it here. That's where I'm just saying that, no, as citizens, we have the rights to do whatever we want here locally, generally, in terms of that. And I'm very familiar with the raw milk ordinance in Humboldt County, and I understand that real well, and there's been a movement against it, and the supervisors are holding off, and so it's not, it is happening, and it's happening right next door. And so that's just one example that I'm familiar with. I'm not weighing in on I'm not advocating for a position here yet. I just want clarity, and I don't want us moving forward under the pretense of false information. And I don't know where that's coming from, but if it happened at the last meeting, I just would like to clear that up right now.
All right, I can answer this.
Sure.
Our local police power lets us enact any law not in conflict with state law. State law says a local jurisdiction shall not prevent delivery of cannabis or cannabis products on public roads by a licensee acting in compliance with this division. So if you have a license in Humboldt, you can deliver here and we can't stop you. I don't know the raw milk ordinance, but I'm guessing there's not a state law that's on point, so Humboldt has that authority.
Additionally, things like, I mean, we physically can't prevent people from the use of recreational cannabis. I mean, this law puts that into effect. So we as a county can't tell somebody you can't use recreational cannabis, even though we may or may not want to as a county, but we do not have that ability. So not everything here we have the ability to just say no to.
I get what you're saying, Blake. I respect what you're saying. The idea that county, local control comes first. That's the entire premise of these regulations from the state level. But also, our job is to find out where that line is. I mean, the state does set out things that you can and can't do, and so but like you say, we need to make sure that we have those facts. So I guess right now, the way the law is written, you can make deliveries into a county where there's a ban, but I think later on, the Bureau plans to make some clarifications to that, and that may not. I don't know if that'll stand or not.
Does it specify recreational versus medical?
No.
This is also something that came through initiative. This is Prop 64. So I don't think the regulations can do anything about it. It'd have to go back to the voters.
Right.
I think we should just plan on being stuck with this.
Okay.
I thought you had mentioned that they did not have to be a storefront. They could be,
Sure, that's the other thing we talked about is non-storefront delivery services. So you have a facility that's licensed the same as a retail outlet would be, has all the same rules and protocol. It's just not open to the public.
It just doesn't look like it.
Sure.
they still have to have the same licenses, and it costs
Yeah.
everything except for the cameras in the building and the.
You still have to have all of that. You have to have everything that's not specific to having people on site. So I don't know what the camera requirements would be for that, but you have to have the same kind of security protocol and inventory reconciliation stuff that you would have. You have a facility, presumably in a commercial zone space that's accessible during business hours to regulators and operates under the same rules and scrutiny that a regular retail operation would have. And I think the interest and point and appeal of it is economics. Not every business model wants to engage in having a storefront or having a retail area. That's a completely different business model, different set of customers even. And so the retail stores, a lot of them, they want to be able to do deliveries. And then people who want to be in the delivery service but don't want to have a retail store want to be able to have a non-storefront. So those are the different kinds of businesses and the interests of them. They have some pros and cons, I guess. But
I think one of the pros to that, as mentioned in our previous meeting, there are ways of having, for example, alcohol delivered to your house. There's services that will do that, taxi will do that. There's no law preventing that. However, with Prop 64, my understanding of the law is that there is a law preventing an individual person from transporting cannabis without these proper licenses. And so by allowing a business to conduct the form of delivery service, you're potentially eliminating or mitigating people under the influence of cannabis driving themselves or conducting themselves in public when they want to maybe just obtain some cannabis. Maybe they're using it perpetually for a treatment of something or possibly just for recreational purposes, but it might prevent them from actually driving, let's say, under the influence to get to the store to get some more. And this is the only way, I think legally, that probably could happen. I'm not sure how the legality of asking somebody to go buy some and drive some and give it to you, I'm not sure. Probably it's okay too, but this just creates a service that keeps maybe the public at a small, safer position.
I've had a pretty open stance on the delivery aspect. You know, I could see there's communities who have seen that there's not less on the pro side. You know, some communities, they want to start with delivery only, and some have said we don't want it because you can't secure your employees so well. You know, there's not as much. You know, you could follow a vehicle, and the vehicle, you know, the vehicle might be making itself a target for robbery. So you've got those two sides of the equation. The way I look at it, I was kind of advocating maybe if we did like a medical only, you know, that to me that would make a lot of sense. You know, somebody who's maybe, you know, doesn't have a whole lot of help in their life and they're bedridden or have a hard time getting out, you know.
There was some input during my last report from one of the board members, was that if there was to be, you know, considering of delivery service, it would be restricted to medical only. And then we had that pretty long discussion about that and what that meant exactly. And if we could start by filling in Blake a little bit on like the ideas of that. And there was questions about carding. How do you ascertain whether or not the person has a medical card? You don't have to have a state medical card to make purchases, only just to be exempted from the sales tax. But you have to have, you know, a doctor's recommendation, and presumably the delivery people, you know, have an interest in a protocol for checking IDs. They don't want to put their license at risk, just like a retailer of alcohol.
Is that something we would try to work into the ordinance, so that it's kind of clearly defined as to, you know, what the transition or transaction at the end looks like, so that you don't have the wrong people ordering? And
Sure. I think that's, I mean, it would be defined by the state in terms of you have to be, I mean, if it was recreational, you'd have to be 21. If it was medical, you'd have to have a doctor's recommendation. So I'm not sure how the county, what extra details the county would get into defining the process of checking IDs. I don't know how that works.
You know, one avenue, I don't know how legal it is, but as a collective, you know, in the beginning, we'd have a membership agreement, and the bottom half of the agreement was for staff to do due diligence, you know. So yes, I did look at the database. He's a licensed physician, you know. Yes, you know, they're at that location, and yes, this recommendation is valid until, you know, such and such a date. And yes, this person is of age where I don't need a parent to be the caregiver, you know, in this transaction. And so, you know, maybe there's something we could do where, you know, the delivery driver, I would think health records, you know, you want to, you know, the HIPAA protects that a lot. But, you know, so I don't know if we want to like collect any record of the doctor's recommendation, but now, on the other hand, if the person wants to avoid paying that sales tax, they actually do collect, the retailer does collect a bit of information, because they get it off of the state-issued medical marijuana ID card, and they take that number, and they have to attach that to the transaction to show that, you know, there was reason for them to not collect sales tax on the transaction.
When you have a medical card, do you get charged cheaper prices?
With the state-issued ID card, you can avoid sales tax, but that's only about a third of, you know, the tax that you're coming across. But most people don't have that state-issued ID card. You know, probably, I would say maybe 1 out of 200, and I think that would be a,
What
you know,
does it cost for that card?
I think we're talking about $70. You know, not too many people have found it worthwhile. A lot of people have fears about being in a registry, you know, and they don't have to.
It wasn't ever required by law, so people didn't do it. So anyway, I guess the question, Blake, you're sort of wondering the details of the transaction or the ID checking or the circumstances can be detailed into the county ordinance. I think, I don't know, it might have,
Some sort of verification that the buyer is the buyer?
yeah, I don't know. I think, is that something that's hard for the county to get into?
I don't know. I'd have to look and see what already exists. You know, if it's, I mean, if the field is occupied, if the state's already decided on a process for doing that, I wouldn't want to get into it. If they've left it open, then yeah, we should look at it.
It's just like the same rules that you have if somebody walks into your dispensary, I believe. I mean, there isn't, it's sort of up to the operators to ensure that the people they're selling to are compliant, and just like when you're selling alcohol.
Well, I
I
guess
think it
our,
works like that.
our decisions are kind of opened. First of all, do you want to do medical only, not recreational?
Sure.
Do you want it open for both, recreational and medical?
Sure.
Or not allow delivery in our county, and I doubt somebody from Humboldt's going to come up and deliver it.
Yeah, that was the
because of
thing,
cost.
is, right, is that we can't block it from elsewhere, but it's probably not gonna come up this far that often. But then the idea of making sure that the county and the city are consistent on this, I think that's really important, that the city and the county don't have two different rules on delivery, especially with the boundaries and
Are there quantity limitations in transactions?
yeah, there are.
Minimums and maximums, or?
Not minimums,
Just
but
max.
maximum's the same, I think, as for when you purchase retail. I don't think that they're less as a delivery.
So yeah, you're an ounce of cannabis and for recreational, and you get there's a certain amount of edibles, and it depends on the potency actually. So there's actually a bit of a formula there if they're getting an edible. And then the concentrates, there's 7 grams of concentrates in a day.
You can't buy it in bulk though.
So on what you're, I guess, what, I'm trying to understand, so one transaction, some person, a customer walks in
Right.
and buys, and you said it's an ounce, like literally 1 ounce?
1 ounce, someone with a doctor's note that's going to a place that's licensed for medical retail can, I believe, go to 8 ounces, which would be a unusual sale that, I've never known to occur, so.
Okay.
But,
That's not usually a retail quantity, but an ounce of flour is like usually a maximum retail quantity. So
There's a transportation maximum. too,
Sure,
I believe,
there's a-
whenever you transport it,
a
whether
dollar
you're
amount.
transporting it from store to store, or to, like in this case, maybe to a delivery service, there's a,
I think it's a dollar value limit they
I
put
think,
on
yeah,
the
there's a dollar
delivery.
value limit on how much you're allowed to transport.
Okay, what's an
That's-
ounce roughly worth at retail?
I don't know,
Less than a
between,
day.
between $50 and $250 maybe.
Yeah.
So that is sort of allays some of the security concerns, limiting the total amount in the vehicle, and then advertising on vehicles is not allowed by the state. So in terms of visibility, delivery services are probably good for the community, because especially a non-storefront delivery service, you could have a lot less visibility in the community. And then I don't have any problem with limiting it to medical only. You wanted to have delivery service. I mean, part of the idea, if we're talking about people who can't make it out, or people who don't want to be seen going to get their medicine, then that should be a valid concern for medical, maybe not as strong an argument for recreational.
One thing, I brought it up last meeting, so I think it may be just worth adding right here to our discussion. I view this as a potential very large business for tourism, because if we're talking about the fact that potentially this could be delivered to, let's say, a hotel room, this could become a pretty big advertisement, maybe within the hotel itself, and they could be, their guests would see this, and the guests would have access to not know where to go to the other store, but they could just order it to their room and deal with it on their own terms as they're traveling or staying in the area. So this potentially has the potential to become a pretty significant business, let's say, in the local area. I don't know if an out-of-area business, say operating in Humboldt County, would choose to capitalize on something like that. I mean, there are delivery, costs involved with driving that far. However, I mean, all it probably takes is 4 to 5 to 6 transactions a day to make that delivery viable for that business, and that business then they're operating with no ability for us, let's say, to regulate it, potentially.
I think you wouldn't.
Can I
collect the-
speak to the hotel delivery? It was brought to my attention at the last meeting when that was mentioned that a lot of the local motels have, a lot of no smoking policies
Yeah,
in their
you couldn't
rooms.
smoke there, sure. But
But
that's,
just the access in general to it.
that's a small part of how a person might consume cannabis anyhow, though. You don't have to smoke it. There's, I think, probably half the products on the shelf aren't smokable.
Yeah. So just something to think about.
Yeah, so there's that component. I think the other thing that came up was if you have delivery services at all, you're probably going to have more consumption generally, just as a number. If is that good, is that bad? It's an issue. It's probably true.
Is there any input from the sheriff's department
Oh,
on
yes.
delivery, Eric?
I did specifically request that the sheriff be here to chime in on it if he had any thoughts. Thank you for reminding us.
Well, I just feel that he would.
Good morning. It's an interesting subject, and I wouldn't say I'm well researched on it, so mostly what I'm going to be talking about is my opinion. Brought up some safety concerns. I can appreciate that for sure. I look at it from a different perspective. It doesn't feel safer to me, and I think maybe this isn't a great pun, but not to get lost in the weeds. If we're just talking about recreational marijuana, which is kind of the primary focus, right? But my thoughts are, I don't personally like the idea of a delivery system. From a couple different perspectives. I think if I'm the business owner, there's been a lot of safety concerns with delivering cash, delivering things of high value, delivering things that are in large demand. I definitely see that tasking law enforcement a little bit more. I think there's going to be some laying in wait, potential robbery sort of scenarios that we're going to have to worry about. And when it comes to recreational, my first thought is if you want recreational marijuana, go get recreational marijuana. I do appreciate your point that you brought up on the medicinal side of things. If there's some folks that really, it's a medicinal issue and they can't get out of their house and they don't have an opportunity to get it, I think that's a bridge we certainly need to cross and address. But I don't like alcohol being delivered. I don't like, I don't see a circumstance where I personally, in my capacity as sheriff, as a law enforcement officer, would really come up with more weight on that somehow being safer. I do see the point you brought up about maybe people under the influence, going to it and coming away from it. But I think the larger concern from my perspective is protection of that property as it gets to where it's going. I did find some communities that, and this is an interesting idea, but I did find some communities that actually provide some sort of transportation for folks, from their home to the business and then back to their home. But again, I sort of see the same issue that now you have a vehicle with all this presumably very high grade, valuable marijuana on board. Is it a matter of time before a robbery happens? Is this going to be a scheduled thing? It's just, I don't know. I just see too many moving parts, too many other issues that we're going to have to continue to try to think of and figure out policy on. And my personal feeling, and again, this is just, Eric Apperson talking, I don't like the idea of a delivery system for recreational marijuana. I just feel like there's going to be a lot of burden that comes with that. And that's just sort of where I'm at. I definitely think there's going to be some concerns with theft and robbery too. I'd like to believe there's not, but that's the first thing that jumps into my head. And I can't remember which one of you addressed it, but it's all over the place with how different communities are responding to this too. So I don't know that there's a successful model out there to really look at.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
I guess I would like to maybe weigh in with my opinion, and really it's going to mirror what we just heard from Eric. I believe that the recreational thing is very uncomfortable. And I spoke with a supervisor in Merced County recently, and they do basically what we're talking about in medical only and not recreational, which there's a lot of reasons maybe to tiptoe into that version, right? So that's where I would come from, is probably, you know, I've got a few more maybe questions and concerns in terms of the medical, just the customer verification aspect of that. I want more clarity on that. I think we already talked about that. And then the, you know, the potential quantity of dollars in the cash and you know, that I guess just works itself out. However, I just understand businesses and employees and the lack of good employees and the lack of dependable employees, and so we're talking about, you know, not necessarily the business owner, but most likely an employee that's going to be the delivery folk, and you know, it's, you know, hopefully they're competent and capable, right? And that there's a lot of room for error there, and so I would be in favor of some parameters around that, however we do that. But I imagine that it's already I mean, we wouldn't want that same incompetent employee at the retail level behind the counter, so I assume that there's some parameters there already, right? It's like, I don't really know exactly how this works, but when you sell alcohol, you have to have the ABC license, and you need to follow a protocol. And so I assume that exists on the retail side, and
Yeah,
we
there's
would
a big
want to
long-
impose it on the delivery side.
There's a big, long list of the bad things that happen to you as a licensee for breaking various rules. There's a big chart, you know, depending on severity up to license revocation. And so I think it's, because of that, it behooves the business owner to protect their business and their investment, because it's easy to lose your license, I think, for trying to operate outside.
And I assume that would be true. I'm just asking for clarity that, yes, that exists in the home or on the delivery side, right? That those parameters are going to carry forward.
Yeah, they follow the same rules, for sure. So just as far as the medical versus recreational, I agree with at least starting out with medical only. There's some consensus here in the group, other than the idea that we'd be missing out on the economic side, the tourist side potentially for deliveries of recreational, but that may not be a big enough reason, at least in the beginning.
Are deliveries happening currently under the collective model?
Yes.
So there are people, or there might be people, who would lose a benefit they're currently getting if we didn't allow medical deliveries?
I think so, yes.
I don't really like the idea of delivery in general, and I don't really see that medical is that different. It's the same product, cash, you know, $12 an hour employee running around selling this stuff to people's houses. I don't know if Heidi has opinions on what exactly the burden to the county would be, but I mean, I'd prefer to, you know, we are isolated up here. Functionally, we can probably prohibit it from the community. I'd rather do that first. And if there's this big demand and people clamoring for it, we can always loosen things later. It's harder to go the other direction when you have licensees. I don't know, Heidi, do you have any thoughts?
Not especially. I was trying to think it through to find out what impacts it would have on my department, and I'm not thinking of anything obvious if it were to happen. But I do prefer, if we are going to do this, to limit it to medical.
Yeah, so the product's the same. It's the people, presumably, the customers would be different. So it's not about the products per se. And then so that goes to ascertaining the ID, you know, the medical card. And we had a conversation about that. You know, a lot of people get medical cards so that they can have access to recreational. I mean, that's how it was before recreational was allowed. I don't know if people would definitely or necessarily be, you know, it costs $100 or so to get a doctor's card. some of the people would be doing that just so that they can get deliveries.
Well,
But-
I think the state defines your medical at the
Sure.
site of the store, what they can accept and not accept as medical. You know, either the card or a permission from a doctor handwritten, and you guys have to verify to a certain
Sure.
extent. So, I mean,
Right.
if we do medical, I think that, you know, medical delivery would
Mhm.
be somewhat okay, but other than that, I don't think recreational should be delivered.
Mhm. No, I think that's fine. Yeah, so if we're going to continue the discussion at all about delivery, then we can just have a consensus that it would be medical only, you know, if we're going to continue it at all. And just take the recreational off the table for deliveries, at least at this time. And then I also don't have a huge problem with not including it in the beginning if we want to not have this be a complication at this time and consider it next year. I really don't have a big problem with that either.
Can we get some public comment?
Yes.
I'd like to hear what others
Yes.
have to say.
All right, public comment on this topic.
Linda Sutter. Well, that quandary here. I don't see anything wrong with recreational and medicinal delivery. If the guy is going to only deliver medicinal only, who's going to be monitoring if he delivers recreational anyway? So, yeah, I know we got a state license, but I don't know how you guys. I think this is ridiculous. I guess if you're gonna do it, you either do it with recreation and medicinal, or don't do it at all. After all, at this point in juncture, we're looking at the benefits of what the county is going to receive financially. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron Squareback. I kind of see that the medical side of this is probably going to start waning away once recreational becomes available, because most people aren't going to want to go spend the $100 to $200 to get their medical recommendation if they can just go out and get it recreational. So it may limit the people that will actually be able to receive it via medical, because they're not going to be going to get their medical license any longer. And but I do see it as a economic benefit, being able to deliver it to the hotels and other places of businesses and a person's home. As most of you know, the hotels and the motels in the county, most of them fill up come around tourist season. All the hotels start to sell out, and it's almost impossible to get even so much as a campsite. So I'm kind of in favor of allowing some delivery just on that. So that's my opinion.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am Patty McCulley, the River Coast Collective, also chairman for Safe Access Now here in Northern California. And I am fully for medical delivery service. There's a lot of paraplegics and whatnots that can't get out, don't have a driver's license or anything like that. I don't see any issues with it. For delivery service, you have to have a permanent lockbox in your vehicle to be able to be any part of a delivery service under the new prop. And as far as recreational, I don't really know the effects of it. I myself didn't vote for Proposition 64. I was against it. I don't really see a big demand coming in for us as far as state cards go. It is, I think, a $100 fee from social services to get a card. A lot of people don't want to do that because now there's a bit of talk about infringement on their Second Amendment rights. So there is that issue going on with that. But I fully support municipal deliveries.
All right, thank you.
It's technically supposed to be for safety issues and for transportation issues, and that way it, like there is actually a company in town that just strictly does deliveries from collective to collective. They're retired, law enforcement, and that's what they do, is they make safe access by transportation, but they have specially designed vehicles with permanent lock boxes in them.
So again, my question is, what's in the lockbox? What's supposed to?
That would be whatever they're purchasing, with marijuana.
The product?
Or cash.
And/or cash. All right, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the transportation requirements are. There was originally going to be some requirements with defining the locked box and all of that, and then I think when the emergency regulations came out, they hadn't finished that yet, and I'm not up to date on what the transportation requirements, any changes have been made. I don't know if Joel's heard anything on that. So I'm not sure what's required by the state or not. Do you know, Patty, if that's a state requirement at this point, or if that was just a proposal? Okay, okay. Sure. Right. I believe $1,500 is the maximum amount that a delivery vehicle can transport at any one time. So the total number of their, the accumulation of their sales can't exceed that. Yeah, so I don't know. There's definitely plenty of issues on either side. I'm not interested to advocate strongly one way or the other. My position for the delivery service was kind of simply an economic freedom and idea, and for healthy competition idea. Storefronts are a lot more expensive to operate. It's a big deal. It's more of a big deal. Not to say that any state license is a big deal now, the things you have to go through. But I don't like monopolies, and I'm into fair competition, and it's tough to do in this business because it's not a normal economy. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, is pretty much just simply fairness in business. An individual owner operator who wants to run their own business. They're the only person doing it. They own the business, they do the deliveries. It's a very small operation that's just local, by a local, for locals. I just would hate to see people who want to engage in that kind of business be locked out of it and have to get a $10 job at a dispensary or whatever because they can't do their own. I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to be the case, but yeah, that's my standpoint.
One of the points that was first brought up was the concept that, how do you tell the difference between a medical sale and a recreational sale? And if we're allowing distribution on medical only, how do we know that's what's happening? Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge concern.
It's just a doctor's recommendation, so it isn't, I mean.
Yeah, and then the second point, the second speaker that brought up the concept that, well, hey, at some point it's all, as recreational gets more common and allowed, then,
mm-hmm.
How do we stop that? So
sure. Well, you'd have to break the law. I mean, if you were going to say that it was medical only and you provided a false document, like a fake ID, because you're not 21, it wouldn't be an age ID in this situation. It would be a doctor's recommended fake. So you could falsify that, or the driver or the business of the delivery could choose to look the other way or whatever and break the law that way. So, you would have to break the law. So then it's a question of enforceability, I suppose, which is sort of the core of any law. How enforceable is it? I don't know. I suppose that's the issue at the retail level too. It's probably easier to encourage a store to be compliant and check IDs because you can do a sting operation probably easier. But I think they'd probably do that with deliveries too. You order a delivery and see how they operate. Are they checking IDs? Or not? Are they checking cards or not? So I imagine it would be the same process. But I don't know. Is that like is that something that the sheriff's gonna have to get into? Like, who does alcohol stings? Is that, you guys pay for that? So I guess that would be an additional cost and project for the sheriff, like the same as in addition to doing it for the retail stores, you'd have to do it with the delivery service also.
Well, I'm kind of still where I was at the beginning, where I just don't think it should be done. Everybody says you can get alcohol delivered. Yes, maybe you can, but I don't think it's legal, because if a cab driver brings it to you, he's not an ABC licensed person to bring it to you and having to get the same information as 21 years of old. So he could be delivering to the minor or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
And, I think it makes it too easy. So I kind of, if my consensus or vote would be, is just to not have it in Delaware County. And if somebody comes up from Humboldt, then let them come.
All right, and it'd be the same with Crescent City also, if they just wanted to allow Crescent City. Right, I just, we would hope that they would be on board also,
So I guess I would kind of weigh in right behind that with, again, with what Joel had put in, saying, that he would also not be in favor of this. And, I think we were all kind of willing to go medical there for a while, and we heard some conversation and some concepts here that were brought up that kind of obviously made me think a lot more about it, because I have not put a lot of thought into this, and I certainly don't understand, how it would really play out. And so, it seems like a safer, more realistic, more responsible approach would be either just table this piece for a while and wait, and so really do nothing, or we go on record as being opposed to that kind of a delivery. So we've got a couple of options.
Joel, does the county ordinance have to expressly prohibit delivery in order to prohibit delivery?
Yeah, it probably should. If we just leave it to the state, if you just are allowed to do retail, probably the state's going to decide whether it's delivery or not. I think it's just in the regs, it has like an on-site versus delivery category under the license. It'd be nice and easy to just no delivery.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's only two positions we can take on, yes or no. There's not a silent on it. Silent is yes. So if the county says no, the county says yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much where we got on that.
Do you guys know where Eric is on this?
I believe he supports delivery service. He wants to run a dispensary, it's good for business, but I don't want to speak for him, but I think that's where he's at it.
Do we know where the city's at on it? Because I don't think we have to worry about Humboldt. I just don't think they'll ever, but the city, I think, would be the one thing that would just kind of make whatever we do.
They haven't had
They
haven't talked a lot about it. I brought it up at their planning commission meeting where they deal with all of this, and I don't think they didn't recognize it as the issue that it is. I think there are all these issues, and none of this came up when they were talking about it. They were just like, oh, I'm for it, I'm not, I'm for it. And it kind of sounded like they were leaning toward allowing it. I suggested to allow it so that to allow healthy competition, or if you only were going to have one storefront in the city limits because of space, then you need to allow some delivery so you have some competition. That was my input. I have no idea where they are at this point, though. I haven't heard any feedback. So, yeah, I'm not interested in holding things up. I'd like to see this retail ordinance get done and get wrapped up. I'm all for adding things over time as we go. It seems reasonable. I think this whole thing is kind of a grand experiment. I don't mind making it as simple and sparse as possible. As Joel's indicated, it's easier to add things than to unwind things, if that makes sense. So. Yeah, anytime. Yeah, please come to the mic. Thank you. Yeah, not like normal board meetings here. You could just, anytime you're inspired, please speak.
Okay, I appreciate it. My name is Glenn Hirsch. I'm an LVN. I really don't have much of a vested interest in the county. I'm only here because my father-in-law died 6 months ago. I'm helping my mother-in-law. But I used to be in law enforcement in this area, and I'm a nurse now. So I worked at the bug station for 5 years. So I know a lot about the people that are coming in the town. And I see a town that I love that seems to be, there's not enough money here anymore. And there's a lot of vagrancy and problems with that. And then the point the sheriff brought up, you know, it's created more burden with the delivery. And I'm wondering, is there any way that you guys could put a tax on it?
Yeah, we
Like
have that.
A higher, you know,
Oh.
something to bring in more revenue to the sheriff's department or the
Sure.
county? And then
Yeah.
when people complain, you could say, well, we were gonna say no, but if we're gonna say yes, there has to be some regulatory, way to do this, so it's not getting to minors. And, I can tell you as a nurse, I did home health care for about a year. And I had 4 clients in Springfield, Missouri that didn't know themselves. They're all women with MS, and their house would smell like pot before I went over there. And I didn't smoke pot, but I was warned, you know, not to say anything, and here's the reason why. A lot of people think that there's no real benefit from marijuana, and I would have to say that if you have a nervous disorder, the cannabinoids do repair the myelin sheathing of the neurons, and as a matter of fact, the United States government patented it, I believe, in 2007.
That's right.
So I'm not saying let's make, you know, do anything drastic. I'm just saying, how can you promote freedom, yet still make the money for the enforcement and the regulatory piece? And my thing, I'll just speak freely if that's okay, is this is one of 7 or 8 best places in the world to grow marijuana, and the economy's dying. I'm saying, you know, either could it be managed differently, you know, or I don't have the answers to it. So I can't just wave a magic wand. I don't know what pressure you guys are all under. You guys see the bigger picture, but I guess I would just want to say for the record that I believe marijuana is a less potent drug than alcohol. And the closing arguments on the Senate floor, I believe, to make marijuana illegal was that jazz music and reefer cigarettes were going to make white women smoke with black people. That's how that law was passed. So I'm just
exactly right.
throwing it out there. I'm not saying it's a cure-all, you know. Do y'all have any questions for me? And thank you for your time to let me come up and...
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any questions right off the top of my head, but
Okay.
I might. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
I just want to remind you guys, you know, 59% of the county votes passed for legalization. We're not here to discuss what we can't do. We should be here to discuss what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Robert. Oh, yes, please.
I think I've met some of you guys before. My name is Sandra Hinchliff. This is my first time speaking here, so I just wanted to point out a couple of things here. I am a multiple autoimmune disease survivor. So cannabis is, of course, it's very important to me, but I wanted to weigh in on the delivery because one of the last speaker just mentioned an additional tax, you know, to enhance the economy. So I am on the side of delivery because I think it improves access for people who are sick. Just because recreational is here doesn't mean that medical is going away. And some people are not able to have access, able to leave their homes if they're extremely ill. I've been through that myself. So I was going to suggest that perhaps since delivery is written into the state law under transport, is that correct?
I think it's just part of the retail license.
Transport's something different.
I see, okay.
It's more for wholesale product,
I
think.
see. So I just wanted to weigh in that I think that perhaps with delivery, maybe an additional tax could be added to that just for delivery service. So if somebody needed a delivery, maybe they would pay a certain amount they would go directly into the tax coffers. And that would be another way to enhance the tax collection.
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to mention about delivery is that Harborside, which is one of the most well-known dispensaries in the state, they offer delivery in the Bay Area. This has never been an issue. You don't have children accessing cannabis through Harborside's delivery. They have membership cards, and IDs and membership cards are checked each time you receive a delivery. I used to receive delivery all the time from Harborside when I was going through radiation treatments, so I don't think this is an issue. So I was going to suggest, as far as delivery goes, specific rules or maybe membership to enhance the security of a delivery, so that we know it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. Perhaps a membership card with a dispensary, along with showing your ID, and that improves access for the ill. And I think that's it. I just wanted to say that. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
So I would be open on any direction with this, but just looking at public input, I think I think the public wants to see some form of access to the public that shows up today. I think it's, and Joel would like to see it more consistently applied. So I'm not sure where. I'd like to see medical access, and like Sandra's mentioning, maybe there is a little extra protocol we could add in for a medical delivery, to ensure that there's a little bit, we do a little bit something extra in this county to make sure that, because you can deliver to an 18-year-old with a doctor's note. And so there is some, maybe some concerns that maybe something like that. So maybe we could do a little checklist where the delivery driver does some due diligence or something like that. To be sure it's going to somebody who's eligible for that.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. And
I mentioned the last meeting, I just want to reiterate again, if we're talking about not allowing delivery service for medical purposes, we have to all understand that every other medication that somebody needs is delivered, can be, and is totally legal for it to be delivered to their home. You can get opioids or any other prescription medication that's prescribed by a doctor through a pharmacy is delivered to your home. And so if we're talking about going so far as to saying we're not going to allow medically prescribed cannabis to be delivered to somebody's home, my opinion, we've gone way too far. But we can do that. That's not a problem. I just think the county's overstepping where they shouldn't be stepping in that scenario.
All right, well, let's, I think we sort of had a direction here that if we were going to continue talking about it, then it would be for medical only. So under that kind of pretext, I guess the discussion is verification. And if there's some way to have an additional layer that's specific to the county, like memberships or something. It sounds complicated. It sounds like something that Joel would not want to deal with. But it doesn't mean that it isn't possible. So
The vehicle needs to have a swiper, an ID swiper or something,
yeah, I don't know either. I don't know how technologically how you would do it, how you limit it in a way that's legal, or it's not discriminatory, etc. I mean, if you could genuinely ascertain the medical needs of people, that would be awesome. I mean, that's kind of the whole problem with Prop 215 and the whole system is that there never really was a genuine way to ascertain the need. So I don't really have any brilliant suggestions for it, other than I would like, obviously the idea of limiting it to medical only, checking of, you can't use a verbal recommendation. You have to have a documentation. Most of the doctors that I've seen, they have their own hotline registry, a database that can be checked, and then but there's cost of enforcement to the sheriff to check up on these operations, make sure they're checking. The idea of an additional tax to pay for that, it may be too late with our tax ordinance that we've come through. We have tax already for retail. We'd have to adjust that ordinance to include something special for delivery. I don't know if timing allows for that. So yeah, that's a tough balance, like the cost of dealing with the enforcement versus the needs of people who need medical delivery. I don't know. Not an easy one for sure.
Well, is there a delivery charge normally from the retailer that normal goes out?
Yeah, probably. You're
So-
gonna charge something.
Right, yeah. So I mean, just to get it delivered to your home is gonna cost you a little bit anyhow.
Sure.
So, is it too late to put into the tax type of deal? We haven't sent the tax to the board, have we, or has it?
The board will vote on it on Tuesday.
Can you get that into it before Tuesday?
No.
They already introduced it at the last meeting.
It's,
so-
yeah, they've seen it twice, it's been introduced. This one will be the vote to get on the ballot, and we're out of time to, I mean, you know, because of the way we've done this, we're imposing taxes on things that aren't legal yet, on things we haven't developed the permits for yet, and that's just, delivery wasn't something we looked at and foresaw, so it's pretty much too late to do a special tax just on delivery. There will be one on retail, but
Right.
medical was exempted
Do you
from
think-
that.
Joel, do you think that having an additional separate tax on specifically retail is something that is, I guess, I want to say legal, but, you know, just, is that okay?
Specifically on delivery?
Yeah, like for deliveries.
Yeah, the county would have to basically have a separate delivery license. There'd be a license fee for that, and then our authority is basically to tax any license. You know, if we're doing extra things to verify extra requirements to make sure people are properly verifying, you know, that's extra cost to the county that will be reflected in a permit. You know, we might price delivery out of the market by doing this anyway. So I still would rather wait and look at it next year, or the year after, and see how the market goes, and see if there's a demand, and see if anybody cares really. That's just me. Also, you know, if this thing does become federally legal in the near future, it can be like prescription drugs, and it can be sent through the mail maybe. You know, the future is uncertain. Right now, I'd like to just make it simple.
I'm for making it simple.
If we wanted a different tax, I wouldn't really be in favor of a separate tax, but if we wanted to do that,
too late, though.
doesn't the board have the ability with the 2 to 6 variants, that they're giving themselves to select 2 different numbers there?
They can't distinguish, you know, we put the tax on the retail permit. We didn't distinguish between delivery retail and regular retail. They wouldn't have the discretion to,
The transaction.
yeah.
Yeah.
What it is there's no retail tax on medical right now. So if we're trying to tax delivery that's medical,
Right. You
know,
wouldn't
that-
collect the tax at all.
yeah, that's not in the range the board has to choose. It's not the structure of the ordinance.
Like you would just call it a fee.
Well, it'd be a separate license. It'd be part of
We
it.
could call it a fee as long as it's reflective of the actual cost to the county. It can't be like bonus money like a tax can be.
You could justify costs because of the enforcement, I suppose.
You could, theoretically, the county could, it'd be like a license fee. You could have an excess license fee for a delivery service,
Right.
and then it would be up to the delivery service people to be imposing
Right.
this proportion of this fee on every transaction or something like that. They could pass that cost along on their own end. It wouldn't be a tax, it would just be like a $2 delivery fee every time they had a transaction.
Yeah, I don't know if that'd be a fee or a tax.
A permit fee.
Dispensaries could voluntarily donate money to the treasury of the county also. So, but that's sort of not worth talking about
Well, you
either,
don't-
so.
You don't want to voluntarily go to the county and give it to the sheriff.
Sure, they
Tell
could
them
do that.
exactly what it's for.
Yeah. Can you? Can the sheriff receive donations, like from private business for whatever purpose you want? Okay. Right. So yeah, so it's, the tax thing's not really part of it. Yeah, deliveries. All right, well, I know what I'm going to go into business doing. I'm going to open up a delivery based in Humboldt. And I'm going to do this, you know, I'm going to take orders on a schedule and come up, you know, 3 times a week and crush it. So. All right. That's right. Yeah, it's 3 times what I make now.
Are you voting not to have delivery service?
We're not going to vote. We kind of decided at the very first meeting that we haven't gotten into that yet. Luckily, we've been able to advise by consensus, because we're a non-binding advisory committee, so voting is sort of, yeah, it's sort of futile. So I think our advice just carries more weight if we can have a consensus rather than showing the vote, showing who voted yes, who voted no. I think that just leads to division. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what we're talking about with the consensus. I'm not for pushing it in terms of spending a lot more time on it. I'm okay either way. I'm okay revisiting it.
Jesse,
personally disappointed, but
I think that we have enough on retail to start drafting an ordinance.
Right.
And in the process of doing that, I can research these other issues that have come up about verification, things like that.
Sure.
And so when we come back with an ordinance, we can talk again about the details about putting delivery back in there.
Super.
And that should allow us to move on.
Great. Okay, I think we covered it enough to where we can think about it amongst ourselves and the ideas and perfect. Right. Okay, super. Excellent. Skip number 3? Oh, skip to number 3. Yes. Let's skip to number 3 since we spent a bunch of time on that. Discussion of process of communicating and consulting with native tribes regarding land use decisions in areas of traditional tribal cultural affiliation. So this is me asking about, in response to requests from the tribes wanting to be directly involved in the working group. I don't know how that works politically. It's something with the board. So I was advised to have it read this way. This is the formal way of exploring that. So I don't know if I'm saying that right or not. This is
So could you, I guess, elaborate, the tribes or a tribe
all the
asked to
tribes
participate?
The tribes have expressed interest in being part of the process.
Sure.
For county ordinance, and I think this group welcomes that
Sure.
wholly. And there's just some technical, political, legal process for how that works, and I think we needed to agendize it this way in order to have the conversation. So, but now I'm speaking out of school, and I don't know where we are with it. So now I need help.
So I know one process by which tribes would be involved in all of these decisions, and that would be through the Environmental Review Committee, or I guess ERC, that's the Environmental Review Committee if I'm not mistaken. I know tribes are stakeholders in the Environmental Review Committee, and all things that go through the Environmental Review Committee end up in front of the tribes to make comments, suggestions, add their input to it at that point. So that is one point where ordinances or property changes or things like that can come into play with communications with the tribes.
So let me maybe lay the groundwork a little bit. Under CEQA, when we do environmental review, we have a duty to consult with the tribes. Because the state has exempted this ordinance, these cannabis ordinances, from environmental review, there's not a technical requirement to do that now. What will happen is when we issue the use permits, each one will have that duty to consult. So the consultation will happen, but I think it's the will of the working group, and I think the tribes appreciate it. If we just went ahead and started now and not wait until we get, a year from now, we're looking at a specific location and start the conversation. The tribes, I think, are taking pretty different approaches to cannabis. The Yurok tribe is the one that's come and wanted to participate. you know, I think at some point the conversation will really kick off at a higher level between the tribal council and the supervisors. But I think a conversation about how the working group wants to get input, take input, give input, and have that conversation is worthwhile.
All right, so we can talk about it before the supervisors and the heads of the tribe communicate. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Okay.
You know what, Elliot?
Yes, please, please. Thank you. Morning.
Ellie Hoopson here with the Europe Tribe. I think that some of this dialogue is perhaps started by our participation and our request to continue to participate. We see there are two different levels that participation can take place. Some of it is sort of at the staff level where people could be on the committee and part of the dialogue, especially if this is like an advisory committee. We would just be another voice that would be offering information to the Board of Supervisors. That would be separate from something that would be like a G2G. Government to government.
Okay.
So the government to government is something that would require different Board of Supervisor members as well as tribal council members.
Right.
Any participation by us at the staff level does not meet that standard. So we would come back with information that we could provide to tribal council and from those meetings so that we would inform them and they would be better prepared to go to a G2G, just as we would be providing information or you'd be providing information to the Board of Supervisors. So both of those things can happen.
Okay.
As far as, you know, information, I know there are a lot of different things that you guys are contemplating. You've talked about ban zones, you've talked about cultivation zones, and some of those dialogues probably do have to happen at the government-to-government level in order to be enforceable. But we could still share that information at this level so you would know exactly what the position was as best we could communicate it.
Okay.
But it still ultimately has to be, I think, at that higher level too.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then from the beginning, I think, or at any point, it'd be helpful to have you or a staff member, or whoever is the right person to be here. You know,
And
part of the
we are
group.
invested in trying to have this be done as well as possible. So
Yeah.
we've tried to have somebody present.
Yeah.
I've been away the last few weeks and was not able to be here, but I knew this topic was coming up.
Yeah.
And I will come when I can, or we'll have other representatives. be
Okay,
here.
super.
So, my understanding is that it's being brought to the Board of Supervisors to see whether or not there would be a tribal member on the committee. And it was at the next Board of Supervisor meeting.
We took it to what we call agenda review, and I think it's not going to be on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
I don't have all the details, but I think it's the feeling that it should just happen in what we call 2x2s, G2G meetings, rather than offering all the tribes a spot on the working group. Kind of a fairness thing, maybe. I don't have all the information, but I don't think it's going to be on the agenda to appoint a UROC-specific representative on the working group. That being said, you know, what's the difference if you're here and speaking?
Yeah.
You know, I think people will honor your input.
Yeah,
Exactly, that's what I was just going to say. I would, and instead of getting too, you know, technical,
Yep.
if we could accomplish our goals, your
Yeah.
goals, our goals, everyone's goals, by just having you all here, whoever that is, you, staff, whatever, you know, we're not all that formal, it just feels formal in this room.
No, well, you're formal enough and
Yeah.
informal enough, so
Yeah.
it isn't that.
So-
We do want to make sure that we're on board, and the point is not only to offer information, but also is to support that this is done the best way possible.
Right.
So
And-
we
and
are
s-
invested in having that happen.
And so, you know, as a committee member here, I would certainly invite you and everyone from the tribe or the tribes to participate and just continue to participate like you are right now.
Thank you. And we're committed to do
listening.
that, and we will
Okay.
continue to. I do think that the tribe will feel somewhat disappointed because they'd sort of heard that there would be a seat, and they were enjoying that sort of sense of respect. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be any less motivated to be, you know, a participant. Just to like, you know, we had heard that it was a possibility. So there's going to perhaps, I'll have to explain what's going
I
on.
had expected that too from the beginning of the formation of the working group. You
Yeah.
have lots of voices in different departments
Yeah.
here, so I don't get all the politics of it. But what I've been hungry for are some some real data and input from the tribe. And so when I ask for things like numbers, like we've been talking a lot about setbacks, that's kind of the bulk of the conversation for the retail ordinance. And I'd like to get some input. You know, we have the tribal boundary, we have the ancestral zones, we have, you know, I wanted to get some input about setback from the reservation boundary lines. Is it helpful to have the county say, okay, you know, no retail within a mile of the tribal boundary line, or not in these cultural areas or whatever, and just get some like some
I
data.
can answer some of those questions,
Yeah.
but not all.
Okay.
As far as, you know, the tribe very much opposes, because right now it has a zero tolerance,
Right.
any kind of cultivation or sales that would occur on the reservation.
Sure.
We would be requesting that the Klamath would be a no-ban zone. And
Right.
one of the things, just to inform you, is that we have a huge opioid crisis, amongst other things that have been going on within the tribe, and the federal government is invested right now in trying to remedy that. So we have people that are going to South Carolina that are being trained for response on that. We also have other ways that we're having support. So one of the reasons that cannabis comes into that conversation is because of things that have occurred in the past. When I say that, I mean grandmothers that have been held up by machine guns, and waters that have been poisoned by waste that has come from grows. And so we have people who have been very sick and have been afraid and live a subsistent lifestyle and have no ability to respond to these things. So at this point in time, the reservation we really want to protect it from having that kind of conduct. And so we're opposed to having it at this point.
Certainly.
Off reservation, obviously, where there could be a setback, that would just protect the reservation all the more.
Right.
So I think that having dealt in Humboldt, having very specific or narrow setbacks in the measurement of feet didn't satisfy
Okay.
the tribe.
Okay.
So, you know, if you're talking about a mile, obviously that's going to be a different conversation. But one of the issues is that in the ancestral lands, and where cultural sites are, for instance,
Right.
those are unknown to tribal members too. Those are protected so that nobody goes to harm them. So it is very difficult for us to say, this is the spot.
Right.
So in essence, we need to have the boundary of the ancestral lands and then some kind of protocol that we work on.
It will
So-
come down to specific
Yeah.
situations,
Well,
right.
specific tribes, first of all, but as far as that goes, also specific areas that are highly sensitive, either
Sure.
because they are watershed for the Klamath, or highly sensitive because they are
Mm-hmm.
specific use cultural sites, not just within the ancestral
Sure.
lands, but other things as well.
And those locations may not be revealed until an actual applicant is in the process.
In which case it would be-
revealing where their location is, and then
And then we
coordinating.
would, yes, exactly. So
Okay,
that
right.
investigation would take
Sure.
place. But then, so having within the ordinance some language that would leave room for that would be productive.
Right, okay. And then I'm just speaking off the top of my head, but this doesn't relate to retail, which is kind of what we're talking about, but with cultivation, the water board has a very strict licensing regime, and they have some specific references to where the locations are. They have a map of where you need to contact the tribe, and I don't know that, my area wasn't in that, so I didn't have to look into it, but they have a system that maybe we can learn from a little bit about how that works.
That sounds like a great place to start.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
And just, not to be specific necessarily, but be advised, I am a tribal member. I am on tribal committees. I do deal directly with tribal council and federal government process for the Calawadeni Nation. And so I am up here trying to represent the tribal perspective a little bit and trying to convey some information about how that's important to tribes and their cultural significance, and, you know, totally understand that we're not going to get that any of the tribes here specifically saying this is our important cultural site.
Sure.
Stay away from this site. That's not going to happen, because tribes aren't going to sit here and let that be known, that floods people there. It's for protection. It's for protection for many reasons. And so that's, you know, one of the discretionary processes through the ERC is a potential way that the tribe can weigh in discreetly, you know, to say that I'm seeing this application and and I don't like it, you know, it's too close. And so that's one of the, yeah. Yeah. But that does give an eventual, you know, it's kind of like a fail-safe situation, right? You know? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm confused.
Me too.
Yeah. So it's my understanding that the Yurok tribe has zero tolerance for the cannabis, but there is a grow house that is owned by the Yurok tribe. It's my understanding over by the Elk Valley. That's not a grow house. It's not by the Yurok tribe.
Not owned by any of the local tribes necessarily.
They just lease the ground.
Okay, thank you. It's over by Elk Valley Casino. That's the one, yeah.
The land is owned by Elk Valley.
It's owned by the tribe,
Yes, the
but,
land is.
but they've got a grow house?
Yeah, that's not probably like what this group is here to talk about, like.
Well, it
the
is
tribes are
because it's
doing.
a manufacturing grow house, so, you know, I mean,
Well-
if there's zero tribe, zero tolerance, I don't.
But that tribe, that's not operated by the Yurok tribe or any local tribe. It's not operated.
But it's on tribal land.
I believe the Elk Valley.
Well, the elephant in the room.
No local tribes operate that.
I believe that the Yurok have been no tolerance, and the other two tribes have been, you know.
Yeah, the
looking
Yurok
for
and Elk
more.
Valley aren't really having anything to do with one another. Different tribes.
I can only speak about your tribe.
And that's not your,
That would not be your tribe.
Oh.
We have zero tolerance. If it were, it would be something that we would actually shut down.
okay.
Yeah, what the tribes are doing or not doing, you know, whether true or by rumor, isn't really part of the purview of this advisory committee. I don't think, but maybe it is. I don't know.
We're not here to tell tribes what they can and can't do. We're here to get advice or recommendations from the tribes as to what their positions are and what they would like to see happen in their areas of control, you know. I know the Yurok tribe, the only thing I can speak to specifically about that was that I know the Yurok tribe has mentioned specifically that within their reservation boundaries, they will have zero tolerance, and there are avenues for which the congressional bill that was, I think it was through a congressional bill, I can't remember exactly how the boundaries were physically established. There are avenues for which the Yurok tribe can, in fact, enforce those on county-owned feed property, because it's within those, the reservation boundaries. So what happens within a designated reservation boundary can be over and above what the state can impose upon you. And this is a situation of that. Their health and safety code for which the tribe can enforce a zero tolerance or a zero allowance of these cannabis regulations within that boundary line. So what the Yurok tribe is saying is going to carry weight with, for sure, you know, not only because it's their request as a local federal government and a federal tribe, federally recognized tribe, and a local jurisdiction of that, but within those boundaries, they can make some decisions to that. So that should be considered, you know, for sure, that those are maybe quote-unquote areas that can't have licenses issued or shouldn't have licenses issued for properties within that boundary line. And they supplied maps showing where those were, I believe. We looked at some of those last week. So.
Well,
Go ahead.
just on your, it says discussion and process for communicating and consulting with the native tribes. We have Kurt here on the committee that's one of the native tribes, and you guys show up, hopefully, and continue to show up, and can voice from the public. If you wanted the seat on the board, that would have to go through the Board of Supervisors, because that's how all of us got up here. So I think that pretty much answers the question. If it's going to be somebody up here on the committee, then that needs to go through the Board of Supervisors. Otherwise, we do have one representative from one tribe, and so I think that we could not spend a whole lot of time on this
Sure.
question and move on.
Just to clarify, I kind of pushed for this because I've been wanting to see a member of the tribe actually appointed by the board to this group. I think part of what, well, I'm talking about the Yurok tribe specifically. And the reason why is because I think what gives this advisory committee any credibility at all is the wide range of viewpoints from both the public and staff. The Yurok tribe is a big member of the community, and I think that it would go a long way to have them be a formal member. I mean, our votes aren't binding anyway. I don't see the harm in it. I only see a benefit in it, and by not having them as a formally declared member by the board, I see it as an opportunity, not an opportunity, but there's a possibility for division in the future. And I see zero negatives. I mean, I don't understand all the politics of it. It seems like there may be some politics involved. I don't know, but
I would like to just weigh in that I would support what JD just said. I'm not opposed to it at all. I would encourage the board to put a member on here from the Yurok tribe. However, I also want to point out that kind of, to me, the obvious work is, it feels like 75% of it's already behind us, but I really don't know what the future looks like, and so I'm just, it's a little late, but it's not too late.
I think the bulk of the issues that would be relevant to the Yurok tribe are going to come in with cultivation. I think what we've been discussing now is sort of just the tip of it.
Well, then I suggest that somehow we ask or get it on the agenda or encourage the Board of Supervisors to get somebody on the board here for cannabis now so that we can continue to go forward with all of our decisions to be made, as she has mentioned. That's kind of what she was hoping too, or the tribe was hoping. So I don't know if it's too late to get on the agenda for tomorrow?
Well, if not, it can go on the next one. Yeah, it's next week, but I mean, it can, if not this next meeting and then a future meeting, but I think that it shouldn't. Yeah. Go ahead, please. Will you come to the mic just so everyone on the video recording can hear? Thanks.
I actually followed the direction on how to try to get it on the agenda. I contacted Chris Howard, and I also contacted Joel. I thought that it was going to be. I'm not sure if I did something wrong, but it certainly is something I've made efforts to get on the agenda. And I understand that there are a lot of different tribes with different positions. I know that the Yurok has somewhat of a unique position compared to the other tribes, so I do believe that, especially now that there's been some expectation from the tribe that this was a possibility, I would like it to be heard by the Board of Supervisors. And our point in doing this, as I said previously, is just to make sure that we are involved in the conversation and things happen as well as they can. It just adds that much more commitment. It means you have a body that would have to be here rather than just sort of somebody who can show up when the schedule fits. So I think it would be more productive.
Question, did you have a particular person you wanted to appoint to that, or just a generally like somebody just representing the Yurok tribe in general? It could be a different person.
We have a council member that is going to be sort of a liaison.
Probably the North District or something like that, maybe?
Yes, exactly. In addition to that, however, we do have a cannabis, sort of like a committee or task force. We call it the Cannabis Task Force. We were going to assign it to that just so that we'd have somebody that had knowledge, could always appear, since obviously council members can't always appear. They have broader schedules than that. So it is a specific group of people that would be assigned to it. It isn't just one person.
Oh yeah, I was just trying to wonder how that would function. So maybe it functioned more like a county office person that's representing, right? Like so sometimes the sheriff's office shows up and different people represent the sheriff's office every time.
That's right, exactly. So if it was necessary for a specific person, I think the tribe would be willing to try to make that assignment. I was recommending that it be a little bit broader than that, just because council member is so invested in it, Aubrey, but he also has other
The only reason I was asking that is because you can see how some of we're like individual people up here, right? Yep. And then as a new meeting comes along, for example, Blake wasn't here the last meeting, we're communicating directly with Blake to try to speed him up on what we talked about last meeting.
Yeah, it's helpful
And
the
so-
same person.
So if the same
We
person
certainly-
doesn't show up every time, it's a different communication that happens, right?
Or at
And
least
so
the
it's-
same couple of people.
Yeah.
We want continuity. There's
Yeah,
no
exactly.
point
That's
in
the only reason I was
changing it.
asking
It's,
that.
we absolutely are invested in that, and if it does need to be one person, we can make that happen.
Yeah, it probably didn't have to be one, but just a couple, if it was like one or an alternate, sharing the responsibility. That'd make it easier, yeah. Doesn't have to be that, just an idea.
Yeah,
I would
it
advocate-
It helps the continuity and the communication within the group, because the more people you have to go over and rehash items over again, it just delays and takes a long time.
You know, the cultivation coming up that we're going to be talking about, I would advocate suggesting to the board to add a member from the UROC so that we're not backtracking, you know.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. They're, have influence over a large area, you know, more so than the other tribes. I don't know if there's some concern of having a member from one tribe on the group and then not another. Is that maybe part of the concern of the board?
I really don't know.
Okay.
But, you know, Jesse, if you or if Ellie wants to bring it up at
Okay.
the meeting in front of the board, you can
Okay.
probably get a direct answer on it.
Great, because I think the York tribe is the only one who's specifically requested. And so if it, you know, was an issue of worrying about having to have a member from each tribe, it probably isn't an issue because we haven't been requested to have a member from the other tribes. I mean, we have you.
Stuck with me.
We like you. All right. Are we good on that topic for now? Number 3? Okay, go back to number 2 a little bit in our last half hour, or any other thing. Want to talk more
Well, we
about?
had existing operations on
Yes,
it.
we skipped over the other half of number 1. Existing retail outlets. Thank you, Roger. Yeah, so that's, and like the other sticking point, these are the 2 sticking points that I noticed through our conversations with the retail ordinance. What to do with the existing retail outlets. Are we gonna make a big effort to try to include the ones that we have and change setbacks, make corridors? You know, there's a couple different legal processes to allow that. Some are cleaner than others, I guess.
But don't they have to be in compliance with at least state law?
Public comment, you come to the mic and everyone can hear you.
Don't they have to be in compliance with state law? I mean, you
Yes.
guys, okay, because
Absolutely.
Miss Patty's not in compliance, and so,
Counties can shorten that distance and be in compliance with state law, so it's all perfectly
so,
legal.
so counties can make an ordinance that defies state law?
No,
600 feet is what state law said. If you're under 600 feet, that is, you can't make an ordinance that's going to defy state
it
law.
doesn't
We've
defy
been-
state
we've-
law. State law specifically allows counties to change that distance. That's how
Oh,
the
is that
law
right?
reads.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we came to that conclusion, I think, last meeting or the meeting before, because we've been talking about the fact that it kind of appeared like counties could only, let's say, lengthen that distance or increase the distance or more strictly enforce the rules as opposed to
Right.
lessening them. And we came to the conclusion
Otherwise,
through looking at some of the laws that you actually can reduce those distances, and there's abilities to, you know, grandfather in existing businesses and or reduce those distances in order to accommodate. So that's totally within
there's a wide
the
amount of
parameter of
discretion.
what we can
for
do
it,
as a
yeah.
county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the point in even putting a distance on?
I don't know, tell us.
In my opinion, the point of putting a distance on is that so just any business couldn't just open up right next to that school, let's say a new business, for example. And the reason we're talking about existing businesses right now is because these are businesses that are existing and happening right now, and we have yet to see negative connotation with those businesses or complaints or problems per se on the existing businesses. So that's where the whole, what do we do about existing businesses that may or may not be infringed upon with this code, so.
On the existing 2 businesses that we're talking about, right now, they're medical only, because we haven't got the, so if we,
The
Well, sort
collective
of.
model, you know. And then when people say medical a lot, it's, yeah, they're medical, but it confuses the issue as if the medical gets to proceed, past a certain date. But really, they're all, commercial, they need to be commercially licensed or they'll cease to exist, at the end of the year.
But Joel kind of had a problem with doing somewhat of exceptions to the rule, because then somebody comes around and says, why are they specialized or accepted for the rule? And he didn't seem to think grandfathering was a good enough reason. But if we were to say medical can be within a certain distance and then retail could be within a certain distance, is that possible?
I think that's one of the options we can shoot for, I would like to, see these as businesses that have contributed to the economy locally. I was looking at, our books and, there's one farmer up on a hill somewhere in this county, but he collected $50,000 last year from our organization, and we've helped the community, and Patty's organization has. So that's a lot of what a lot of communities have done is they've seen these organizations that have existed. They haven't brought in any negative aspects, and they're valuable members of the community. We see this with the city. I think the city rejected a license that would have retailed alcohol next to the movie theater. The movie theater is kind of a kids-oriented place, with the arcade games and whatnot. And so I believe they began going with the policy of that you need to be 1,000 feet away from, something that's youth-centered if you're retailing alcohol. But of course, the existing retailers, that are already too close, such as Safeway, are still selling alcohol, and, that didn't impact them, but they decided in the future. So I'd like to see, so we could either do a corridor access kind of thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with grandfathering, but Joel knows more than me. We were compliance with law previously, and that changed with Prop 64, and so I'd like to see our community, continue to embrace us where we're located, and that's all.
At least in the capacity that we have embraced in the past medically.
Yeah, we were talking about the stuff that we have now that's kind of stood the test of time and scrutiny of the community. It fits in the places that fit in the community now ought to stay. They ought not be eliminated by a technicality. That's all I'm saying. So.
I guess we might have a couple of options, right? One is the grandfather, I think that's an option.
Right.
And then the other one would maybe be grandfather for a certain time period, 5 years till further notice. I don't know. I kind of thought we'd address some of this, not really formally, but we'd talked about it, months ago. And I was always under the impression that the two businesses that we had were going to fit in. And
there's just a couple different ways to do it.
Kind of within the rules. And so I guess obviously we're now talking that
the specific issue is one of them is not, Patty's store is not as, I think, within the setback that we're talking about that we want to see for, was it a school or was it a youth center? I think the school you were fine, the school you were. So it's a.
Youth center designation.
Okay, got it.
So I think we had like 1,000 feet or something for that, for the youth centers, right? It's not numbers, we had 1,000 to 1,500 or something like that.
Well, this is the Seventh-day Adventist school, right? I think this would have been 1,500, is that what was agreed upon?
Yeah, 1,500 on schools.
And so zoning regulations have to be uniform between a zone, right? If a C2 zone is 1,500 square feet from a school, it has to be the same everywhere there's a C2 zone.
Right.
The idea of the corridor would be to find a place where this board is more comfortable, where this board recommends having a higher concentration or allowing shorter setbacks for some reason, right? The corridor is going to centralize the traffic or keep it out of other neighborhoods. I suggested the corridor idea because it could be a valid reason in itself
Okay.
instead of being a front to allow
Sure.
one exception.
Right,
I don't
get
want
you.
one exception. I don't think it'll be
Right.
defensible. And I don't think grandfathering in is defensible.
Right. So the
You
places
know.
that do it, they're just winging it.
No, I think that they probably aren't doing what you think they're doing.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. There's a difference between a legal non-conforming use that you
Right.
have to allow as a due process issue.
Okay.
And grandfathering in a business that's not a legally non-conforming use because you
Okay. 'Cause you
want
it.
to reward,
Got it.
something.
Okay.
So if you're saying that she's not harmful to that school, 500 and change feet, then you should make it 500 feet everywhere.
Right. I
You're
got
saying
back
it's not
to-
harmful.
Right. So that was kind of back to the question that you were saying is why protect them at all? I remember we were talking about it, like, what's the logic? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a stake. If you want to have
Sure.
no setbacks, I don't
Sure.
care. But I need them to be the same everywhere.
Sure, no, I get it. So you can have a specific area where you can have less setbacks for whatever reason.
We're talking about a rezone, right? Instead of having, it's not going to be C2 if you're on North Crest is going to have a short setback. It's like a combining district. Arcata's got like a
Right.
innovation district, right? It's a
Sure.
zoning.
Sure.
It's a much more significant process, and the idea being that as a matter of public policy, this is a good place to have a retail operation or more retail operation.
Right.
If that's not really what the working group thinks, it's just we want to allow one particular person to operate. I don't think that we should be doing a corridor for that reason.
Gotcha.
And, on the issue of the legal non-conforming use, if somebody's doing something legally and the zoning changes, you have to give them, either a period, an amortization period to wind down or let them go forever. But, maybe it seems like a legal fiction, but a co-op is not a retail operation.
Right.
Right? So we're talking about a new use. We're not talking
Sure.
about an existing use.
Just because it's medical doesn't make it existing, the same use, right? It's now commercially licensed, it's a different use. I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
We're not seeing a very good way to make this work, is what I'm hearing.
Unless you just change the setbacks entirely, that's kind of what you're saying, it's consistent everywhere. Or pick a corridor, I mean, it sounds like it could be legitimate if you want to say in this area, the setbacks can be less, and you can do that. But it has to be a reason.
Yeah, and this ordinance is going to go to the board, it's going to go to the planning commission, the public's going to weigh in. The reason that you're telling all of these different people that this is going to be the corridor should be a good reason, right? It shouldn't be,
Right.
Well, it's really a pretense to allow something we want to allow.
And I have no problem making corridors on the places we've kind of talked about in the past, 101, and maybe North Crest, possibly other highway locations, frontage situations like that, having nothing to do with existing locations, having to do with that those are good places for retail establishments. And then what is the setback on those corridors? And getting below 600, I don't think so.
I would say state standard on 600 feet on corridors and no boundary on medical only. To me, there's a huge difference between medical only and recreational. The person that's going into the medical only shop is much more akin to someone shopping at a pharmacy. Whereas, I mean, the pure intent of it, as a recreational shop is I don't want to say a liquor store, but
I don't know if we're ready to have no setbacks for one license type compared to another. I don't know. That sounds great to me personally, but I don't think it's going to fly in the community at large.
I'd rather see the retail establishments being treated equally, medical and recreational. Most of them will be operating maybe even under the same guise, the same shop.
nobody else thinks there's a huge difference between a medical dispensary in a recreational dispensary? The type of person that's coming in, the amount of people?
Well, I do. I know all about it. I mean, if I was just going to write this ordinance by myself, I think it would probably be pretty good. But I don't know that it would necessarily catch a lot of support from the entire community. So I think that's sort of I think you're right, you know. There is a difference for sure, but I think we're also trying to figure out what's realistic, like what's gonna fly right now, you know. If that makes sense. So there's like what's right and what's wrong, and then there's political considerations, unfortunately, that don't have anything to do with what's right and what's wrong. So.
Hi. I am going to stand up for our establishment. We've been there for quite some time. We've never had any issues with any churches, anything like that. We've been an asset to the community. We've obeyed all the laws. We've never been out of compliance with the law. That's one of our mottos is to stay in compliance with the law. We want to be able to continue to support our community in our area for medical. It's not much to ask for. We're here to help build an ordinance that complies with everybody and has some halfway room for everybody to, how can I say this? I'm sorry. We're here to try to bring in public input and have an ordinance that will fly with everybody else. Now, you weren't here at the last meeting, but I did invite all the Board of Supervisors to my establishment. 2 of them did show up. I'll re-say that it took them nearly half an hour to find our establishment because that's how not in public view that we are. They both were for agreement of grandfathering us in. They both wanted to see us exist. They liked the setup. They liked how everything was working out. And they had no problem with it. They actually welcomed it. Joel asked which 2 Board of Supervisors that was. I said that I wasn't able to mention who they were because that's not for me to do, but it is 2 of the Board of Supervisors that are willing to vote for whatever ordinance that we come up with. So they do have our support on that.
That's helpful, Patty. And actually, before you said that, I'm also leaning towards the grandfathering in. I understand that Joel doesn't like that, and you know, I can understand that, you know, legally it's a little awkward, but I do know in reality it happens everywhere all the time.
Yeah, it does.
And I guess I have some questions maybe for you. First of all, I think you've talked about this in the past, that it took you a while to find this location. I think you're renting the facility and you know, to get to that agreement, right? So your interest in moving is, I'm assuming, that's not a desirable
It's not desirable. We have a lot of investment into our building.
Yeah, okay.
In cameras and systems that track where the medicine goes and all this computer software and interest with our landlord even.
Right.
You know, she fully supports it.
And your neighbors probably, and whoever
They
else.
all love us.
Right.
We don't have any hesitation with them. They would be here, but they're running their businesses. You know, they can't just come down here at 10 a.m. and put some input. But if you ask them, or I could even get notes from them, they're all willing to write recommendations for us to stay there. It took us 2.5 years, and I'm not lying, to find a location with a landlord that would rent to a cannabis collective.
Sure. I get it. That answered my question, so thank you.
Definitely, I think the will is there, Patty, and so that's not the issue, I think, but our responsibility is to find a way that makes it legal, protects the county from other people who might sue the county by saying the action wasn't fair. And so that's the crux of the issue that we're trying to help with, I think. Not to further convince the community that your operation is good, but how to do it functionally and legally.
Sure, and I know that other counties have grandfathered in pre-existing medical shops.
Yeah, but what does that mean? I think Joel kind of pointed to that. It may not be what we think it means. The term grandfathering, that has a pretty loose term, and it could mean lots of different things. So the different ways that communities have dealt with this, I think, are different. You know, Arcata has a dispensary that's not in their MMIZ zone. It's right downtown where it's always been, and the city's done whatever. I don't know that it actually violates any setback requirements or not. I don't know the details, but, you know, so.
I would like to maybe weigh in. This is just what it means to me, and this is by no means official. I think what it would mean is that everybody in authority right now agrees and understands that this is the agreement. That we would like to honor your current business and not disrupt it. And you would say, oh, that's great, good, thank you. However, I think from Joel's perspective, down the road, things change, people change, and the authorities change. And so at some point, somebody could come after you 5 years or 15 years down the road, or whenever, and say, no, here's the letter of the law. We're no longer wanting to honor that old original agreement. And so that's what grandfathering in means. It's a loose interpretation of the permission. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, I would only be operating it myself. I have had other investors, big investors, that have wanted to come up over here, take over the business. I'm not into that. I want to just do something. I'm a cancer survivor myself. Matter of fact, I'm postponing a surgery that I have today just to be here. So I'm not willing to, I don't want to sell the shop. I could have a long time ago. It's not in my interest to. I want to help the community. I don't want to, it's my little thing. You know, it used to be 7 of us before we started in the beginning. Well, a lot fell to the side. We had law enforcement, we had registered nurses, we had correctional officers, we had Yurok tribe accountants. We had a lot of people that started our collective. And they have all fallen to the side. Illness, you know, it affects us all. And so I am the sole proprietor of that business, and I have been for the last 3 years. I have no interest in selling out. I wouldn't sell out my city. I'm going to live here forever.
Somebody else could, though, and that's the concern. We know you, but it has to, because it has to be consistent, you know, it could, somebody else can have a different intention altogether. So I have a question for Joel, coming up with reasons that are consistent. So if you have a corridor and you want to reduce the setbacks, and you say, in this corridor, we're going to have an expressly lower density, and that's the reason why we're reducing the setback, where if other areas were not spelling out the density, then we need the setback. Is that a legitimate reason?
I think that's on the right path, yeah.
Okay, so if we can create a corridor that defines these areas where these 2 stores where we want to maybe have an adjustment, but then define the density real clearly, 1 store, or 1,000 feet between the stores, or whatever is the sensible legal way to define that density, then we could have a solid reason that could be, you know, not disputed or that would be consistent. Does that make sense to everybody? You guys listening? Okay.
Like Joel kind of is okay with having a specific density in specific areas. I don't really like the density idea personally. You know, I hear every person up here, Eric's not here to talk today, but every person up here is wanting this business to stay. No one's up here saying we want to get rid of this business. I don't like the changing of the.
It's not up to us, that's most important.
No, I know it's not up to us, and that's kind of what I'm getting to here. I think that this group's recommendation is kind of clear, and we would like to find a way to grandfather in this business, a medical business at this location. And that choice maybe should be up to the Board of Supervisors and Joel to come up with that ultimate choice, because we're up here saying we want to see this business grandfathered in, and if the ultimate decision by the county is that we won't do that because of A, B, and C, then that's their choice, right? This board so far, everybody up here says yes.
I don't think the Board of Supervisors is very good at coming up with things that are legal, consistent, and don't cause division in the community. So honestly, right, I get what you're saying, totally put it in their hands, but I honestly think they're kind of ill-equipped to,
I think they're really
At the
counting on you
beginning
guys to
point.
come up with something
Sure.
that they can just adapt.
So I'd like to continue with this. I feel like we're kind of on a good track with, if we're going to maybe consider 2 corridors and define the density, and if that legally suffices as a reason. It's not density everywhere, but that makes sense, right? To define density in an area where you're going to reduce the setback, you don't necessarily want to have it loaded with a large number of stores.
Well, I guess
I think that's the reason why, when you talk about why have setbacks at all.
maybe, I think you're talking two completely different issues. In my mind, I think the reason for reducing the setbacks is because you want more stores there. And so if you're reducing the setback and then arbitrarily throwing in, well, they have to be X far apart here, but nowhere else, I think then we're going in, we're two opposite directions at it.
I don't follow that at all. Like, the reason for reducing this, it's like a way of mitigating reducing the setback. The reason for reducing the setback is to allow existing operations. That's the reason.
Yeah,
Now-
that can't be the reason.
Right,
what
but
I'm saying.
that's like, okay,
what-
this
what-
is semantic now. It's not the legal reason, but it's why we're talking about it here. And so in order to make it legal,
If we want a density, I think that's fine, but that should, my opinion, should be applied everywhere. Not just in the corridor.
everywhere where there's reduced setbacks. And I talked about that from the beginning, and it kind of made things too complicated was I got back. But if you're going to have, let's say if you're going to have 1,500-foot setback in a zone, then the density is different than if you have a shorter setback, right? Does that make sense? And so you could,
I just don't grasp then why you would ever consider the shorter setback.
so that you can,
I'm-
so they fit in places.
We need to clarify here something, because I think you guys might be talking about 2 different setbacks, possibly.
Okay.
Okay, one is a setback from, the kid zone, whatever that might be.
Right, that's what I'm talking
Right.
about.
Then there's the setback from each other, so 2 businesses.
Yeah.
Which is the.
That's one way to
density,
define density,
right?
yeah.
So, I don't think that we would pick a corridor area, say Patty's not in the room right now, or in our minds.
I think she did leave, actually.
Yeah. We wouldn't pick a corridor area that, and say this is where we want the density, but yet we're going to ignore the fact that there's schools, churches, and everything in the back row, right? So you can have both. You should be able to have these so-called clustered areas, but it's because they didn't hit, our circles. It's because there was room over here.
Sure, right, you have a whole bunch of them piled together because they're clear from the setback, that's fine. Now, what I'm saying is if you can't make clearance from the setback, that's certainly a place where you don't want a whole bunch of stores. That just makes intuitive sense, right? You're a little too close.
Yeah.
Maybe one's okay, but we don't need 40 stores that are all too close. That's sort of the point. And so it seems like if you were going to make a corridor and you put a number on it, you say 2 stores maximum in this corridor. You don't say 1, because then there's no competition. But if you said 2, you create a corridor with a boundary zone, what do you call it, a different district?
I think what Kurt was saying, which I agree with, is if you're going to reduce or remove the setbacks, it's because you want more density. Then putting in a density limit to mitigate the fact that you reduce the setbacks, why would you do that? It defeats.
So that you don't have more density where you don't have more setbacks. I don't understand.
The only reason to reduce the setbacks is to allow more density.
No. It's to allow it to be closer to sensitive areas.
Why?
Why not?
That's what I'm saying. There's got to be a reason why. Why is it going to be different?
That's what I said, the only reason that I can see.
Because the
for
density is lower.
Corridors is because we believe, for example, Highway 101 in Northcrest, we keep saying over and over, those are proper places for retail
Right.
establishments.
You can
And so if we're going to reduce setbacks to allow those proper places for retail establishments to establish themselves, why then are we then saying, okay, but we only want 1 there because we want them so far apart where you're going in 2 different directions at it.
Yeah, so if we weren't talking about a specific pre-existing operation, and you were just looking at the map and saying, okay, where might we put corridors and why? Is this particular stretch of North Crest, an area where you think, let's have a corridor with lower setbacks? Is there any reason why this is a spot that you would do that? And I think the answer, it sounds like, is pretty clearly no. If what you're saying is, Patty's not causing any problems, so it should only be 500 feet, what you're really saying is, retail dispensaries don't cause any problems. It should be 500 feet everywhere.
Right.
And if that's what you want to do, great. But if that's not really what you believe, if you don't really want it that close, or if you don't think the community is going to tolerate it that close,
Right.
it's got to be, you got to be consistent.
I just don't see how density isn't a reason for that. Like, if you have a whole bunch of stores, it makes sense that you would want them farther away from the sensitive zones where you don't want them, versus if you have a small number of stores, then they can be closer to the sensitive areas because they make less impact. To me, density and closeness to sensitive areas are the same problem.
To me,
What you're saying is there's two mechanisms to achieve the same thing. One is setbacks and one is a restriction on density.
Exactly.
And so you're going to choose the density one instead of the setback one in this area, and the setback instead of density in other areas.
Right.
And I'm saying why?
Well, you need consistent reasons, but what does it mean if every one of us votes for the same thing, but for different reasons, and that's kind of what ends up happening,
Well, it's
Blake
not our
might be
vote, but-
totally cool with something I'm with, but for totally different reasons, he might see a totally opposite
I think Joel's saying that's not how the law works.
so I think the board can vote on it for pure intentions, but each one of us, I think, is gonna have, our own.
I think Joel said somebody challenges that, like, you can't,
I guess
that can't be the reason.
I don't see any reason why you make a corridor other than the fact that you believe that that's a good place for businesses. It has nothing to do with the fact necessarily that you're getting too close to a school or too close to this, too close to that. You're still going to have your boundaries in those corridors, but you're believing, okay, we put a very large circle around these areas in non-corridor places, but we think Highway 101 and North Crest, you keep saying, are good places for businesses. Those are good places for businesses, which is why we make the corridor. And so that's the argument right there as to why then you wouldn't have density, because you're choosing it to be a good place for business.
A good place for a small number of businesses, not a good place for a large number of businesses. I don't understand why that
So what's the
caveat
difference?
is hard. The difference between a small number and a large number of businesses?
Yeah. What's the difference?
Okay, let's just have an unlimited number.
Jesse, why have a different setback, though? If you think it's a good place for a small number of businesses,
Right.
what about the other places where you put a setback in? You think that's not a good place for a small number of businesses?
Pat, you said it took you 2.5 years.
It's a
to
good
get
place
the-
for small businesses, a small number and a large number.
So
I'm not following
I want to
that
just
line,
offer
really.
another perspective here, because this does get hard to follow. And Patty, you don't have to stand there, but thank you for standing there. I would absolutely be in favor, we recommend that we grandfather in Patty's business, all right, for a number of reasons, and I can defend that. Also, I think, I'm a little confused by the concept of corridors and clustering. I think that we don't need to even have that conversation. I think we just accomplish everything with the boundaries, and I think there's 2 or 3 different categories for boundaries, and we just pick those, and then the one that says that 2 businesses can only be this close together, then we just let it happen. I really think it is that easy. This corridor concept, it's kind of pie in the sky wishful thinking. I don't really think it'll ultimately matter unless we go to what Kurt's kind of speaking of is, incredibly dense population of a lot of businesses. And I guess I would rather just blanket the entire community with the more of the original zones or circles.
The only reason we're talking about corridors, I think, is because when we look at the circles that we've made,
Yeah.
we find places, for example, like North Crest Drive.
Yeah.
We all kind of agree, I don't know if you agree or not, but most of us agree that that's a good place for a retail establishment. But our larger boundaries that we put in are pretty much eliminate almost
Right.
everywhere on that
Right.
entire span.
Let me offer this perspective. And so I also believe that the market forces will decide where the good place for the retails are. and we shouldn't try to legislate that here today for the future. The part that scares me is I've been to Amsterdam a few times, and there's a zone there that you can walk, and I don't want that kind of clustering of retail establishments. That's where I'm coming from, is I think we've all kind of agreed that, these circles and making, adjusting their sizes and then letting it happen, they're going to fall in place. I've got a little trust in that.
I hate to throw it from a different angle, but since we're not quite adding up together here on those, what about a transitional period for people, we agree that Patty's been in existence, for entities that have been in existence or licensed previously, a transitional period. Patty said it took her 2.5 years to find it was something like that, like where you think, I got 5 years to plan out a relocation. Is that something that would...
That would be more helpful.
Let me backtrack on the grandfathering issue. When somebody is doing something that's legal, and they've got an operation going, and then you change the rules on them, you can't tell them to stop right away. They have a right to keep going. You have to let them. The issue is we're limited in our ability to enforce against them. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about imposing a regulatory regime that's brand new and there's no pre-existing uses. And then carving out an exception for somebody who was doing something similar but not exactly that.
Right.
That's discretionary, and we don't have that discretion.
So you can't do the grandfathering like you're talking about, so it's
The
not
grandfathering
simple.
basically is when you have to let them.
Right.
We don't have a choice to flip that and
Right.
choose to let people as a reward for having been a good citizen all these years.
So
Sure.
outside of this ordinance, Joel, would that be something that the Board of Supervisors could consider independently?
Not
To allow
really, I
that
don't think
business
so.
to continue even
No.
though it's in
I wouldn't-
conflict with code?
Wouldn't be
Because
legal.
it was in...
What the board could do is not enforce against her.
That's not gonna work.
That's not going to work because she won't be able to get a state license if we're just
Yeah.
looking
Right.
the other way.
Joel, on one hand, I think I hear what you're saying is that if we were to move forward with the policy that says, please grandfather Patty in, it's going to go to the board and potentially not get through there. Is that what you're saying?
It won't be legal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to write a law.
Yeah, but you're
and
not
I'm
gonna
not
let
going to
them.
sign off on a law that isn't
Yeah.
approved as to legal form. That's
Yeah, okay.
kind of the only reason they really pay me anything.
We're up against a legal hurdle here. What? Right, yeah.
Ordinances are what we call local laws. They're laws. No, it's not. An ordinance can have a criminal penalty, and they're all laws.
I would say that, there's a legal difference, I'm sure, between a collective and a retail business. But the law spirit doesn't really recognize that difference. The law spirit is that, Patty, you should be prioritized in for state licensing. It's to get these collectives into a regulatory system. We've been collecting sales
Right.
taxes. We consider ourselves doing business, is maybe a collective, but the fact is the hospital's a mutual benefit, and they'll do better. They'll do better if they can raise revenue to provide for their goals. Business is conducted. Revenue is raised, resources are put together, salaries are paid. And the spirit of this law was to extract these collectives out of their existing operations and bring them into a licensed, regulated.
So we need to just reduce the setbacks, and that's the answer.
Yeah.
We were having that conversation last time. Why not reduce the setbacks? Why not make it 1,000 feet for everything? Why not a 5? Even Bobby said, what's the difference between 1,000 feet and 1,500 feet? Why don't we just make it 1,000 feet and make it easier? And I mean, that's fine. Why not just make it 600 feet like the state standard said? That would take care of all these problems. And then, but we're going at this huge, great length to try to help the Board of Supervisors with this dilemma of how many stores are you going to have in the county? Do you just pick a number and limit it that way? Or do you try to create a situation like we've been spending a lot of time trying to create, is how to limit that naturally without picking a number? And that's the whole point of this, I think, was just make the setbacks really big to, one, to to please people who want to see very large setbacks, and two, to try to naturally limit the number of outlets without picking a number. Maybe we're going down the wrong road altogether. Maybe that's not the right way to do it. I don't know. Maybe reduce the setbacks, just pick a number, let the county deal with how you fill those slots, you know? I don't know.
How would a transitional period work if we allowed,
If it was a non-conforming, a legal non-conforming use, and we had to allow it, you could do what's called amortization and give them time to kind of recoup their investment. But because it's not discretionary, we don't get to allow people to not comply with our law. You know, we can't write a law and say, yeah, except the people that, you know, the community already likes.
Right.
If the community thinks that this location is a good location and that 500 feet is far enough away from a school, then that should be the setback. Because our power is to protect the health and safety of the community. If we're saying that 500 feet is consistent with the health and safety of the community on North Crest,
Yeah.
why different other places?
I'd like to address that, and this is, again, my fear. So Patty's business was established over time in a different time period in our our world here in Del Norte and in California and in the U.S. where marijuana was either, legal or not legal, right? And so it was established under a different set of parameters, right? You had to go out, and I imagine it would be a little easier now to go find a willing landlord. I'm just guessing next year. It'll be easier, not harder. And so for us to say that, so do you, I guess I'm trying to debunk your argument. If we're saying we're okay with Patty's personal, unique situation, the business that I don't even know how to find, I'm saying I'm cool with that because it was established the way it was under the certain conditions and because she's involved. So I would give the grandfathering to her, period. It's not that and there's no way I'm willing to say that 500 feet in the next circumstances with different people and different actors and players is going to result in the same effect. So we can't go there, Joel. That doesn't work, at least for me.
There's no way to do the grandfathering, so what do we do then?
5 years, 2 years, 10 years.
Joel just said you can't do that.
We can't.
Well, Joel just said no.
We can make that right.
But Joel just said no. We got to clear this up. You're saying yes, Joel's saying no. Let's clear
I'm
it.
saying, you can tell the board you want to do that, and I'll tell the board it can't.
So it's not going to fly legally. It's not. That's the important thing that matters.
And, to go to your argument that this is a business established under different circumstances, and now we have different circumstances. Now we have different circumstances. If we allow it to continue, it doesn't exist in those old circumstances where you were okay with it. It exists in a whole new place. And it's not members in her collective. It's people who come in. It's different. It's regulated by the state. And even if she says she's not going to sell it, a non-conforming use, if we treat it like a real non-conforming use, which I think is a suspect thing to do.
Somebody can sell it.
It runs with the land.
Right, exactly.
She could sell it, she could bequeath it, a lot of things could happen, we don't know the future. You're making public policy for the county and then carving out an exception for somebody like, it's not how public policy works.
Right,
It's not going to be defensible.
So I think we need to consider if this whole effort of restricting the number of stores, because I think that's kind of what we've been trying to do. All of this has been around trying to find a way to restrict the number of stores, which is whatever. People have different opinions about that even, but we sort of started out with this idea that we would like to, and the board has expressed that also. So I think we seriously need to talk about just the option of scrapping the concept of doing it all with big setbacks and reduce the setback some and put a number on it, say 4 stores, 5 stores, whatever, and then talk about that process being different, how you select those.
Let me just say this. If you're going to put it to this like RFP process, and we're just going to select the numbers stored instead of the distance, we have to have these really detailed rules about how to choose. And if we're going to sell this to the community, one of those rules is going to be setbacks anyway.
Sure.
Right? I don't know if it gets you where you want to go.
Wait, what do you mean, how to choose of the applicants?
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. So I'm thinking of Fort Dix, Smith River, the areas I run in. And you know, I wouldn't want to minimize the setbacks and then go out there and have to deal with those particular maps. It's like, wow. I, as a citizen then, would fight back, and I think that's what Joel's saying, is we're going to have a backlash if we don't, you know, the 40% that didn't vote for this are going to step up at some point. That's what I'm saying. And so I think if we can be as diligent as we can in compromising and coming up with a policy that makes Joel happy, that can fly legally through the Board of Supervisors, you know, it's truly in the...
No, I totally agree, but I feel like we're
community.
farther away from that now than we were before the meeting started at the last meeting. I think we kind of unwound a lot of what we did, and we're pretty much lost at this point. That's how I feel, is like we've really opened this all back up again.
Well,
you know.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and I feel like this whole time we've been working for trying to create a code, and with these setbacks and all these other regulations and rules that we're talking about, and with the prerogative of there's not going to be a finite number that is picked. That's why we're talking about the distances we're talking about, right? And so, you know, yeah, you're right. This is the road we're going down, and the recommendation at the end of it is to not have a finite number because of everything else we've talked about. You know, I wouldn't propose that all these setbacks be imposed on a number. It's just because it's open. And so now we're talking about what we're talking about because of the one location, right? Now we're back to, I don't like what we're doing to this one location. And Joel says there's still going to be setbacks, and we're still going to have to talk about all that. And
So.
Well, that's if there's an RFP process. I
Well-
mean, it doesn't have to be an RFP process.
It doesn't, but think about what we've done this way. This is an administrative record, right? Someday, somebody challenges the law and says, why you did it this way, and all of this is on the record. We've gone through all these maps, had conversations abstractly without thinking of any particular business, and said, this is where we want it, and this is where we don't. Then we get to the end, and somebody says, I'm 562 feet, and now you feel like we're farther away. You know, but all the policy decisions that the group considered, thought about, agreed on, you thought they were good. You know, I hate to be like cold-hearted or something, but the answer is the one business moves.
Yeah. Or we're wrong on our setbacks. I mean, that's the other argument.
That's the other argument. You're wrong
is
on
that
setbacks.
The setbacks aren't necessary, and so that's where we started in the very beginning of this whole conversation, I think.
Well, what's wrong with the...
And I think this corridor clustering concept was somewhat used as an excuse, certainly by me, to not address that issue right up front. So that's why it's coming in the 11th inning here. We kept thinking that we're going to have these corridors with some different rules. It's kind of a silly concept. We need to make zones and not zones, but make these setbacks, you know, strong and function everywhere. You know, it doesn't make sense to not have them function everywhere. It really doesn't. I get that, and I'm sorry to have to say that.
No, it makes sense. I completely get it from a functional standpoint. It makes sense. It's more fair, equitable. I get it.
Since I am here,
Please.
we've been silent on the setback in part because my understanding is that right now you're specifically speaking about places to sell or
Retail outlets.
retail
Yeah,
outlets.
yeah.
And our understanding is that Klamath would be a ban zone, so there wouldn't be a need for us to discuss it any further.
Sure.
Just so that you're clear, that's our position.
Yeah, totally. My other questions were like some of the commercial areas that are pretty close, like the Renner station just north of Klamath and the market there and stuff. Like those technically fit in the zoning of what we're talking about, you know, and so if the tribe was not comfortable with that closeness, that was the direct input I was looking at, so.
I would say that I don't know where the marketplace you mean is. You mean where?
If you drive and you're continuing.
The gas station?
Yeah, the Renner gas station
Yeah.
and and the Woodland Villa Market and Cabins. Like there's some commercials on there.
What's your impression of those?
My impression is that we would want them to be band zones as well, that they are really surrounded by the reservation.
Right, so that was why, since they're past the reservation boundary line, but close to the reservation, then
Right.
I just thought that would be worked into the county ordinance somehow. That was, yeah.
That would be
thank
the
you.
tribe's position.
Totally.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't think there's any question anything's gonna happen on the reservation. It's
Sure.
within what distance of the reservation or within what other culturally important lands, and that's, I don't think anybody's gonna have a huge problem, respecting the tribe's wishes on those things. That was my guess.
Please, yeah. Oh,
And just in closing, I'm going to research grandfathering in because I know other counties that are doing it and that have done it, and they don't seem to have any issue with it. I don't see why there would be a conflict. There's only 2 pre-existing stores.
It's because you could stay grandfathered in if you were not going to seek a state license. And if you were just going to try to stay operating as a collective and then attempt to defy state law when the Senate, cancel, or the Assembly, the expiring, basically, the collective model expires, they say, in January of next year. And so under state law, you wouldn't be legally operating. So I don't know how that works, if you're, that's actually a good question, Joel. If somebody
I'm going
wanted.
to check into it because I have a lot of friends that are cannabis consultants for the whole state of California, court recommended, and I work for an attorney that is constitutional attorney, so I'm going to check into it thoroughly before the next meeting.
Definitely. So if somebody wanted to operate a collective and they were, I guess they would be in violation of state law after a certain date, technically.
The non-conforming use would protect, I guess, from a zoning law.
Okay.
But since you're in violation of a state law, you're a public nuisance for other reasons.
Right.
So it wouldn't help
Sure,
you.
it wouldn't work in that way. So that's sort of the legal argument, I guess. But somebody can always sue the county.
So, what's the specific issue with the transitional period? You're saying because it's not the same business, it's not the same activity legally?
Yeah, I'm saying if we didn't want our law to kick in right away, we could delay it, but she's not gonna be able to get a state license without us.
Right.
Right? When our law kicks in, it has to kick in for everybody equally.
But a transitional period, that was the intent of the collective nature, was to transition into a commercial.
Yeah, they got a year to transition. The county just wasn't there. But, there's 2 different things between the state giving some kind of avenues for collectives to come into the formal marketplace. I don't think anybody's disagreeing that that is a policy the state pursued. The issue is that doesn't override the basic average reciprocity of advantage that's required in a zoning ordinance. That the only reason we get to tell people what they do with their property is that we're treating people equally between zones. Right? Everybody's affected, everybody benefits, everybody's burdened. That's why we can tell people how to use their property. It's the basic fundamental idea of zoning.
Sure.
So to just say, except this one person is highly problematic.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
So if there was, according to your setbacks, there's what, a church that overlaps Patty's position?
Youth center.
There's a youth center, okay. And this is a question for you. Would it be legal or a way to write it into the ordinance as long as that business had permission from that particular person?
If we did it so that that was true everywhere.
Right.
So you can't be within 500 feet of a church unless the church gives you permission.
Right.
That'd be fine.
What do you think, like,
And then
specific permission? Humboldt's been doing that with like private property dispute things, if you can get the affidavits from your neighbors, then you're all right. Something we could talk about.
I mean, I just figured I'd throw that out there. Patty's obviously been there for years. The youth center doesn't, none of her neighbors have an issue with
Sure.
it if they were to get like a notarized letter or something from them.
Just
But
put it on the person if they really need to stay, then
Right.
put that burden on
So
them.
obviously, and then obviously that wouldn't work at a school, like a, a state-run school, they would never give you that permission,
Yeah,
so
they'd
that,
never-
that wouldn't affect
Yeah.
those
Right,
zones,
sure.
but
But,
these
think
more-
about this Seventh-day Adventist church and school. If they're giving permission, can they take the permission back?
I would think so.
That was going to be my next
You know,
question, was
Is that
what
something you
if
can rely on?
they change pastors or something?
If I'm a school, if I'm advising a school, I would say don't ever lock yourself into allowing that because she
Right.
could sell it.
Sure,
She could sell to somebody you don't like.
sure.
You can't stop her from selling it. So
Right.
why give permission that's so tenuous, questionable, hard to get back?
But you
know.
could leave that up to a private operation that's running a youth center, right?
You could do it. I mean, this is a school, right? That the board has different
I'm not
setbacks
certain, yeah, I'm not certain if what Patty's talking about that is in that 600 feet is defined as a
it's a
school
school.
or a youth center, I still don't know.
The Seventh-day Adventist school, it's a private school, right? Yeah,
It's a private school.
so that's not even, that's the 1,500-foot setback that if,
Is that the setback that you guys currently have on the ordinance, is 1,500?
Well, youth centers, we have 1,500 on schools, but if it's a school, if it's called a school because it's a private school, then it's 1,500. And that was the idea, it was these big setbacks and then not having a number cap.
Right.
And then I think the other way to do it is to have smaller setbacks that are more similar to the state standards, and then have a cap, and then talk about whether or not you're going to have an RFP process to select those individuals, or you're just going to have it be first come, first serve. There's problems with both. Maybe there's a different way too to deal with a cap.
Could you possibly, 1,500 feet is a long way. That's,
Yeah, yes.
I believe it's relatively from here to almost the highway, right? Almost.
wow, almost. That's a
Yeah, the
ways.
giant
That's a ways.
setbacks that exit all out.
It's like 2 blocks past 9th Street or something like that, Liquor.
Wow.
And it's also when Bobby was saying, like, what's really 1,000 feet's pretty far. What's the difference? 1,000 feet, you can't see the school from the location anyway. There's probably almost nowhere where you could even look, even 600 feet, where you can even have a visual straight line 600 feet.
And that's where we got into the whole discussion of corridors, when
Right.
those locations are proper places,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore that would be where those
Okay.
those setbacks should be
Right.
reduced so that it allows access.
Catch-22 then? So you have these large setbacks to control density, and yet if you reduce those setbacks in order to create your corridors, then you open up all kind of avenues in other areas. Right?
Well, so for example, in Fort Dick, I'll use Fort Dick as an example, in Redwood School, and the 1,500 foot comes roughly to the corner of the market right there,
Okay.
right in that zone, right? The church and how that operates as a youth center is a totally different thing, which eliminates that area too. But,
Right.
so I'm not sure if anybody's up here comfortable in saying, well, if I place a business 1 block from the Redwood, the Fort Dick Market, like let's, and that being within 1,500 foot, if that's good perspective to Redwood School, but maybe on North Crest Drive, that 1,000-foot distance, which is not so great at Redwood School, is kind of okay, because that's where normal businesses are and they blend in with everybody else, as opposed to having this one place that sticks out in a non-city retail environment. So that's the reasoning I feel behind the corridor lessenings, because these are normal retail locations.
Great.
And that's the only reason.
So you can just use that as a reason for corridors? They're normal retail locations, so we're going to reduce the setback, period, and we're not going to talk about density or numbers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If
Okay.
we do that, we would just reduce the setback to whatever you think is appropriate. We wouldn't
Okay.
then put a density limit. Then you have to go to the Board of Supervisors with, they want 5, and this is premised on a natural cap.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that going to achieve those purposes that you're recommending to the board based on what they've?
Yeah,
told you
it
want?
could. The natural cap is all really subjective anyway. There's no way to determine, like.
Whatever the market will bear.
Yeah, it's partly what the market will bear. It's partly what spaces are available to occupy, willingness of owners. There's all of these different factors. So, really, if if you were just gonna make it a math problem, like you could fit hundreds of stores, like really, I mean, if you just had access to every building, you know, whether vacant or not, you know, you could probably find tons of them, you know, put them all right next to each other, but that's not gonna happen because of the market, obviously.
And I know, like Sheriff Apperson was saying, he's concerned about the propensity towards violence on anytime you have a cash-based business, whether it's, you know, a bank money coming from one, I mean, there's a reason why they have armored cars.
Sure.
I think a lot of that, it would be smart to say no to delivery right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then when they finally get the banking system set up, I think there's a vote on the Senate floor today on a federal level to allow banks to deal with cannabis businesses.
Mhm.
I think that was supposed to take place a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
but they haven't got to it yet. I know that there's a company coming in from Washington that's Fast Click or Fast Pass or something like that. They're a kind of an intermediary credit union for cannabis,
okay.
so that you walk in, it's like debit cards and things like that, so there's no
Interesting.
cash changing hands.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it would be smart to just say no to the delivery until that sort of system gets set up to where people aren't, you know, driver carries no cash. That's just my 2 cents.
Sure. All right, great. Thank you. See ya. Yeah, totally. I agree. So I'd just like to kind of wrap up direction for thinking, so we can think amongst ourselves about this notion. I do kind of feel like we're starting to, at square one with, you know, which direction we want to go in terms of how to limit the number. We kind of share that sentiment too, that we, No?
I think we've got it.
okay,
Myself,
help me out then, because I don't,
I think we've got it with our setbacks we've talked about.
Okay.
With our corridor reductions in some of these zones that we think are good places for retail business.
but we don't have a reason for that yet. I mean, do
Oh, I
we?
just thought-
The reason would be that you think that's where you want to drive
Okay.
the retail to.
But, right, but then the issue of the density, like, we just don't worry about that and just,
If we're going to talk about density, I think
Or
it
numbers.
applies everywhere, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
Because, and then, obviously, we've already discussed
Yeah.
here that we all feel like this want to try to figure out how to grandfather in this existing business, although it doesn't seem like there's a clear avenue to do
Yeah,
that.
it
So
can't be called
it's kind of not
grandfathering.
something more that we can really discuss.
yeah, I'm just saying, does this jive with the idea of not having a cap number? That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, if we're gonna do, like, we're gonna have a corridor and then not specify a density, does this jive with still recommending that the board does not adopt a cap number that then involves an RFP process? Does that make sense? Like, that's kind of what Joel brought up.
So, yeah, so density, like, that's the same thing. If we're, and I think we're all discussing about not wanting to put a cap number on it because of all of the other choices that have to be made and regulations that have to be written.
Okay,
And so, you know, and then then density is a discussion on its own.
okay.
And I don't think that we should be putting a density on it, although if we do, it's everywhere.
Okay, yeah, that makes
You
sense.
know.
All right. I don't think it's gonna make a huge difference if you create a corridor in the kind of a small areas. I don't think it's gonna allow a huge increase in density
I don't think
anyway,
so,
so.
just based upon the number of properties.
Right,
businesses that are
exactly.
In those corridors.
Okay,
So
perfect.
Keep in mind that these corridors are, you know, this is a rezone, right? It's a more significant process than the overall ordinance.
Okay,
It's more mailed out letters to property owners, it's planning commission hearings. And so, you know, it'll be
Right.
quite a process.
it'd be nice to avoid if
The
possible.
planning staff might totally object when we get into it.
Okay.
I'm saying it's legal, but
Right,
the other thing is that if, the only thing that's really gonna be affected is this one property, because there's no schools within a shorter setback or the larger setback in other areas within these corridors, it's gonna come back to, is this a huge pretense for one specific
Right.
problem?
So it's
And
not-
that's just
right.
something you have to contend with over and over again, because
so having corridors isn't necessarily settled. I mean, that may not be a good idea.
I would drop the concept.
Okay. Well, I think we should definitely have something to think about between the next meeting, like some kind of direction in this direct, because we've definitely changed where we're going.
So the focus The focus, in my opinion, then, should be on the next meeting of deciding whether or not we have corridors, and then that also affects the conversation of the setbacks.
Why don't we do
Total
this?
setbacks.
Why don't we move on to manufacturing? And let me play with what I have.
Okay,
And if the setbacks are going to change, they can change real fast.
okay.
Right? It's a different number. And if I can come up with some creative, weird thing, I'm going to keep working. I mean, it's fun. It's what I do. I'll try to make it work. I'm just telling you that I had concerns last time. I spent a week looking at it. I have more concerns now.
Right, I'd like to ditch the corridors and just make this simple and have something more focused to think about, and, yeah.
I think we can do that and nothing changes. It doesn't really change the fact that corridors may establish, but those will establish within.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to talk about smaller setbacks. If there's no corridors, then I'd like to talk about smaller setbacks for the entire region. Right, okay. All right, perfect. Let's leave it there, and then scheduling, 2 weeks. Is next Wednesday available?
2 weeks and 2 weeks.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. Is that it? All right, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.